Welcome to Conlangery, the podcast about constructed languages and the people who create them. I'm George Corley, and with me over in Ireland we have Edgar Grunwald, also known as Artifexian.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hi, George.
Well, hello, Edgar. And I have off and on followed your channel for a while. And like years ago, you made a few like Conlang tutorial videos. And then you sort of started up a project of building a world from scratch, and the conlanging part, I presume that's like something that's so far off into the future right now because you're not to the point where human beings are on the planet yet.
Correct. Yeah. At the moment, what's going on my channel? Oh, but yeah. So I'm Artifexian. I have this YouTube channel called Artifexian, and as George pointed out there, yeah, I'm doing this project where I'm creating a planet. At the moment, I am in a sort of geofiction stage. Working out climate zones, ocean currents, that sort of thing. And later on down the road, the conlanging will be brought back. So conlanging's on a slight hiatus on the channel.
Yeah. But you are doing some conlanging on your podcast with your co-host, Bill. He has a world and he's not conlanging, but you are sort of reverse engineering a conlang out of his names and stuff.
I am. So yeah, my podcasting co-host, Mr. Bill McGrath, best friend from college. He, for many years now, has been creating this secondary world, which is conveyed to the audience through diegetic means. So every month he writes a small bit of prose that is an in-universe letter between characters. And if I'm honest, Bill was really carrying the show there for a while. And I was like, hey, I should contribute a little bit to this. So I was like, why don't I know something about Conlang. Why don't I make a Conlang for your main culture, the Abheski people? And that is what I've begun to do. The world's slowest Conlang, because I work on it maybe one day per month.
Well, I mean, it's something. By the way, if you want to like do conlanging at like a reasonable pace and get a conlang finished in the year, it's kind of late to get started on that. But Jesse Peterson has a new website on Conlang Year. You can go check that out for anybody who wants to do things on their own. But yeah, I have to bring her on for that. But anyway, back to
I've been following.
Yeah, back to so Edgar, what I want to know, like you kind of consider yourself to be like still a beginner conlanger, although you have done it. You did start it years ago. Like what attracted you to conlanging, and how do you feel it adds to the more general world building stuff that you like to do?
So, I mean, what attracted me to conlanging? I guess there was always before I even knew that conlang was a thing. There was always something in the back of my mind, having read Tolkien when I was younger, that like, oh, there appears to be made up gibberish here, which I later found that was not gibberish, and Magic the Gathering and things like that, and just a whole bunch of like, being a nerd and into fantasy, basically kind of had that in the back of my mind. But I came to it really late. I really only came to conlanging after I started my YouTube channel, which I started in 2014. So I think they came to conlanging in like 2015, 2016. I was thinking about ways to diversify the content. And I was like, I keep hearing this thing conlanging. What is this? And then I came to it then. So I am a complete newbie, as far as I'm aware, because as far as I contend, because I just came to it so late compared to my peers, and yeah, I guess that's my journey there.
Yeah. So coming into it in 2015, I kind of wonder like where was your first place to go? Because for me, it was the Zompist forum and the language construction kit, but that would have been much before you came in.
It was the language construction kit, precisely. Yeah.
You did look at the language construction kit.
Yeah, but not the Zombis boards. That was before my time. But because I got into world building,
Mhm.
like the geofiction thing, through a book called A Writer's Guide to Creating Fictional Star Systems. So I figured same strategy. Head to my local bookstore, see if there's anything on this, and that is the book I found. Um, and then that's what kind of got that kick started. And then thereafter, finding all people I now would consider friends and learning through them, etc.
Yeah. All right. So um like what have you there's not really a whole lot of like Conlang features on your channel and such. Do you have stuff that you've created in the background that you haven't shared as much?
Yeah, I have stuff, nothing that I would consider good or finished, and therefore I am not sharing it at all. Because it's the way I work, George, as well. Is I'm really good at not finishing projects. I'm really good at that. It's like a key skill in life of mine. So I have like countless notes and like little like, oh, I'll start a little phonology because I got really into this particular sound system I found, and then that will go nowhere. So I have a giant file of that's literally called stuff to be finished, which just never gets finished. So that was part of the reason as well why it kind of made it onto the channel, because I was like, hey, if I say I'm going to do conlang stuff, I'm kind of going to have to hold myself publicly accountable to this, and therefore I'll need to eventually finish something to a decent degree. So lots of stuff going on behind the scenes, none of which I consider good enough to be put on public. Again, particularly, in relation to your work, like your stuff is awesome, like on Tongues and Rooms. And like, David and Jesse, the stuff they do is awesome, and Bib's awesome. I look at mine and I'm like, it's staying in the closet. It's going nowhere.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because this is the thing that I really want to dig into for you because we have several people who are creating languages like live on YouTube. You got me, you've got Jesse and David uh, on Langtime Studio. You have Bibluridian on his channel, who we talked to already.
Mhm.
One thing that those projects have in common is it's all people sort of starting from scratch, doing their own thing. Yes, my languages that I'm making for Tongues and Runes are for Dungeons and Dragons languages, but I'm not referring to any Wizards of the Coast material
Sure.
on any language at all
Mhm,
for
mhm.
that. So what you have with the Abheski project is Bill made these names and he had these um, had these particular ideas of how they would be pronounced, and you are in the position of reverse engineering that. It's sort of something more similar to what I've seen more in like commercial languages, in languages for like properties, like when I talked to Mark Okrand about Klingon, this
Sure.
stuff. You have to reverse engineer. Do you feel that you're having a different experience with that than with
Yeah.
starting from scratch?
Yeah, I am. It is eye opening, I think. It's particularly when, because I wanted to do it diegetically, with diachronic, with a view to diachrony, and having to reverse engineer the history out of a given set of, I think Bill has about 90 words, is really tough when the original creator has not thought about it historically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting creative challenge, though, because it really forces you to think outside the box. If I may give an example, um, Bill had said that he really wanted nasal vowels, and my go-to, and in fact, prior to the Abheski project, the only way I thought of doing nasal vowels is to just lose nasal codas, and have the nasal coda impart nasality on the vowel, standard sort of stuff. But some of his words adhere to this, but others that should have had nasal vowels in them didn't at all. So I was forced to kind of find another way of creating nasal vowels, and I ended up realizing or researching it and figuring out that you can lose glottal sounds in a case of like rhinoglotophilia, it's called, which I had no idea about. So it kind of forces me to learn new things. And it also teaches, I think, restraint, because there are many points where I'm like, I will privately talk to Bill and be like, Bill, can we just not pronounce this word this way? Can we just like wholesale changes? Because that would make my life easier. And not relying on that too much and really having to force yourself to work around what's there is an interesting challenge. I've lost hair because of it, but it's interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I saw the rhinoglotophilia. I know that you're sort of at the beginning of that project, but like, do you see other places where you're feeling like you're going to have to do some research and have to come up with out of the box solutions like that? Because I had never heard of rhinoglotophilia before I saw that. I'm like, wait, okay, that's not something I would expect to happen, for given like my own theoretical background and everything. And then, but it happens and you could use it. So
Yeah, I mean, there have been a number of points, but first, fortunately, I'm quite lucky to have an audience, and I will very often, like as a patron only live stream. I do Friday night live streams on my page for my patrons, and very often we will like work on Abheski. And I'm in the fortunate position to have attracted actual linguists, um, as well as conlangers to my audience. So very often they will kind of expedite that process a little bit. I'll be like, "Huh, what could we possibly do here?" And then an actual professional would be like, I have an idea, look into this. So that kind of speeds it up. And the one thing I can think of now is that, again, Bill wanted the hl sound, the lateral fricative, and he also wanted a check or, which I can't remember what it's actually called off the top of my head. I think it's a uh, raised alveolar fricative trill. It's in Czech.
okay.
Which I was like, what is this sound? Where I've never heard of this sound before. And Kara Sarian, I don't know if you know who he is, pointed out that there's a really nice link there in that like the Czech or was created through palatalization. And you could also try and palatalize the L sound to hl in as a sort of analogous sort of thing. So it's an interesting thing that fell out of that, which would have been a whole research project. But like I said, luckily I am surrounded by very erudite people, and that helps.
Yeah. How does your other world building stuff like filter into your approach to conlanging? Because like one thing I noticed when you were explaining the historical method of Bill, you're saying like we're going to pick an initial point, an initial condition, and it doesn't matter how it got there. It's more about picking that and having some development after that. And you related that specifically to the way you did plate tectonics,
Right.
and also picked an initial condition, because there's a similar dynamic. I don't know how much is known about the actual initial conditions of Earth that created continents in the first place, but I know that for linguistics, the actual initial condition of language is unknown and possibly unknowable.
Yeah.
So, like, are there other ways that your other world building is informed by, or the conlanging is being informed by your other world building stuff?
I mean, I think naturally, because like as I do non-conlang stuff, I'm constantly thinking about how my speakers would view the surroundings I'm creating. There's that obviously natural thing. But I think more interestingly, the reverse is kind of the case. I found that conlang, and particularly getting into like a historical conlang, has informed my world building. Like prior to getting into Conlang, I wasn't really into, working out complicated plate tectonics. But I was like, well, wait a minute. I have this historical approach to Conlanging. Why don't I take a historical approach to building worlds and looking at deep time, deep geological time in an analogous sort of thing? So it's the reverse, I think, is the more salient thing that occurred.
Oh wow. Okay, that's very interesting, because like to me, at the when I was like starting out with conlanging, I also did a lot more like world building stuff, right?
Mhm.
And now I mostly just do conlanging stuff. And
Mhm.
like to me, there is a lot of world building that emerges out of conlanging, particularly in terms of like lexicon building,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was doing Luxembourg this year, and I was coming up with words for internal organs, and I realized, well, dragons, the way I've conceived of them, are predators.
Mhm.
They might think of this in terms of like food, and also I saw like a relationship in clicks between heart and liver, and I'm like, well, I've had heart, and I've had pork heart, I've had pork liver. They're kind of similar. Heart is a little bit tougher because it's actually a working muscle,
Mhm. Mhm.
but the texture is similar enough that yeah, you could probably identify them together if you're thinking about eating
Yeah.
them. Sorry to bring it back. Like, do do you find this similar things happening with you, like with actually making like the words of the language and that feeding back into making cultures?
Yeah, yeah. The big one for me is religion. I always kind of struggled coming up with suitable religions, but again, getting into the historical linguistic sort of thing or conlang sort of thing, it's kind of, I don't know, put my religion creation on overdrive. There's just something about when you're coming up with lexicons and thinking about how your speakers view the world, and it just forces you to think culture and think in terms of anthropology. Um, and then suddenly you're thinking religions, and you're thinking different ways in which they name themselves, which is the thing again I never really thought of, because I was just kind of like, you just have a first name, you have a last name, it's done. Like, but then thinking more organically with respect to a culture has led to some I'd say interesting results, but ultimately, again, George, they all just get put in the folder that says shall never be published. But yeah, for sure, definitely.
I mean, I have a lot of conlangs that are also just like stuck somewhere and not
Mm.
and not going anywhere. A big part of tongues and runes was like, okay, I have something that I have to make in public and showcase in public uh,
Yeah.
on a regular schedule, so that I'm doing stuff. But like, yeah, that's normal. That's not a an unusual thing. Is there one of your conlangs that isn't published that like you feel it could be like brought back, that has
Yeah.
something interesting about it?
Yeah. So the most developed one was a thing I was working on, I think in 2020. Again, I was doing it on stream, which is pseudo public because it's not, it's just patrons. So it's a very, very small group of people watching it. And that got to a stage where I could nearly class it as a sort of working conlang sans a decent lexicon, and that was okay. The only problem with that is that I wanted to make a tonal language, and midway through I realized that there's a difference between Southeast Asian style tonal languages and registered tonal languages from basically everywhere else in the world, and I decided that I didn't want to do a Mandarin style thing halfway through, and that kind of scuppered a lot of what came before, and hence it got put in the folder from whence nothing will ever return. But that's a candidate for being brought back. But honestly, I think what I'm more interested in now, especially inspired by Jesse's work, is when I go to do conlang on the channel again, when the humans finally inhabit this planet, I'm just very, very interested in doing extremely basic languages. Because I
Mhm.
find that from my own experience anyway, anyways, conlang is extremely difficult to get into. um, it just requires a lot of knowledge up front. Like start with
Right.
phonology, and it's like you need to know what the IPA is, all of these new symbols. You need to understand, how sound changes work. It's quite a complex thing. So my whole shtick at the moment is trying to think to myself, how am I going to prep this project to try and make conlanging as accessible and simple as possible. So I'm big into creating very easy, minimal languages that I think would fill that role, because I get tons of emails from people still being all like, yeah, the world building stuff is great now, but this conlang stuff, I could never get into that. And I think because there is that kind of barrier to entry in, so
Yeah.
I'm interested in reducing that, because I was a teacher for like 10 years. I taught music, and I enjoy the sort of teaching aspect of it. So that's my main sort of thing. So I'd be more excited about doing that than resuscitating a prior discarded conlang, you know.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The idea that you want to do something basic to teach people. And I think there's some benefit to you at least seeing yourself as a newbie and doing that kind of thing, because there's a reason that graduate students are used as TAs. Part of it is it's cheap labor, yes. That's
Right,
that's definitely a part of it. But teaching helps them understand, and also having someone who is not at the level of a professor and doesn't know like all of the things already helps connect with the undergrads who are taking the class, because they they're not going to accidentally go into some concepts and language that they're not ready for as
I
easily.
I 100% agree with that. Definitely. I think I have
Mhm.
my foot is in the beginner door, and I think that is a useful tool to be able to leverage. Um yeah, definitely.
So what let's dial back. Like, what would you consider? So when you start up with conlanging videos again, you say you want to do more simple, more basic languages. What does that actually mean to you? Like, what kinds of features are you aiming for?
Wow, okay. I think the main thing is not overrunning people with a ton of information. That's the first thing. Because, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I think step one of historical conlang is quite difficult as is. So trying to keep the information to a minimum is one. But also just like focusing on, if we just focus on phonology for a second, like really simple tactics that provide a lot of utility. So for we all know this, but for example, like, oh, let's say we start off with a basic vowel system and we want to move those vowels around. Here, uvulars will do this for you, palatals will do this for you, and just outline that and then show its implementation, but not doing, not starting off with, straight off the bat, I want to have this mad tone system, for example, things like that,
Right.
almost being the teacher I would have loved to have had back in 2016. I'm teaching past Edgar is maybe the way I would phrase doing that. Um, yeah, so that's the kind of shtick, um, and also encouraging people, I think, as well, to not, because I think there's an impulse when one first learns about something to almost assume one is an expert in the thing, and say like, oh, I don't need to follow basic principles, I can just make these crazy creations, and they always invariably turn out to be horrible in the long run. So little things like sticking fairly close to English, like, having like an SVO word order, and like highlighting the fact that English is actually quite unhead initial, despite SVO being a head initial sort of thing, and showing how just holding that variable in place and following it through can produce very like un-English results without having to do a whole bunch of, you know, um, learning about OVS languages, etc. Little things like that. If that makes any sense at all, George, I'm waffling.
Uh, oh no, no, no. I understand. So you're sort of simple tricks to start with to get you like what your goals are. That sounds really really interesting. I do think, I mean, like some of your earlier videos are interesting in that like you covered a topic in linguistics in a very accessible way.
Oh, thank you.
Um yeah, and but at the same time it was not it was like this is a cool thing in linguistics, and it was not so much like there was not so much information on how you would use it in a conlang.
That was me real time teaching myself linguistics. That's what
Yeah.
that was. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. So I'm encouraged to have the idea that you are approaching it from the conlang perspective
Yeah.
of here's what I want to do, what things can I do to get that done? Because that we might need a little bit more of that. I have had my own thought. I had my own thought like yesterday, so I don't know if this is going to come up, but almost thought like, I'm on this music theory rabbit hole in YouTube right now.
I
And like,
heard, yes.
and composing music and getting better at it, but I haven't posted anything publicly yet. But I think when we talk about theory in conlanging, we often are talking about linguistic theory, which I mean, we've talked about how you use linguistic theory in conlanging, but I feel like somebody, maybe me, maybe you, needs to come up with like some information on conlanging theory, stuff like the Nolli triangle and phonesthetics and things like that, to get ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, part of me thinks that the prime person to do this is probably Jesse as well, because Jesse does seem to be very much on a sort of like, this is for beginners. Like, I want to make this extremely accessible.
Yeah.
With the Conlanging year and with, oh god, I'm going to forget the document, Conlang Venture. She had this PDF document, which is basically like a sort of paint by numbers conlanging first exposure to conlang thing, which I think is phenomenal. I absolutely adore Jesse's output. I think Jesse, if I may publicly advocate, that's something Jesse should give a crack at. I will too. But yeah, I think Jesse's stuff should be suited to that, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely, things that are useful. And I'm thinking also in things that are useful. I've had a lot of thinking about like, genres of conlangs and styles of conlanging and like things that I'm seeing done that I didn't pay as much attention to before. Here's a question, because you're starting from scratch. You're doing plate tectonics and evolution and everything. At what stage are you going to introduce humans and then have conlanging happen?
So, unfortunately, as pertains to this podcast, it's the final stage, because I figured, you need to have a planet, right? Like, the planet has to house the humans. So we should do the planet stuff first. If I'm going to do a proper biosphere, like an alien world, I should probably do that before the Conlang, because obviously the humans' language will be informed by all of the creepy crawlies that are going around the place. So I figured the correct order of operations is geofiction, planets first, then aliens, then humans. But given the rate I work at, this could be. I told people it was a 3 to 5 year project. It might be more like a 4 to 8 year project at this stage, because it takes me a long time to do these things. But that's the sort of workflow and order of operations. But I gotta say, like, particularly of late working on Abheski, I have this hankering to do conlanging on the channel. But I can't. Well, one, I don't want to break the form I've set up for myself, but I really have to restrain myself. That's why Abheski, working on this language with Bill, is such a wonderful outlet, because I think I'd be driven stir crazy if I wasn't doing any conlang at all. So that's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. I mean, not to suggest putting more on your plate, but I mean, there's a bunch of conlanging YouTubers. We could all get together and do like collaborations of like, oh, let's take this single let's just take this single proto language, have somebody generate it, and we'll all do different versions of it. Something like that.
I would absolutely love that, and I've thought about something like that, because again, I'd love to. I've never really done stuff as pertains to like sister langs and that sort of thing, and daughter langs, and I'd love to. And that really makes a world feel really lived in when you have that, when you can refer to like, oh, this is classic conlang, and this is, you know,
Yeah.
the Western branch of Conlang. And I've thought, oh, I'd love to do that on the channel, but then I'm like, the workload of that is extreme. So I've thought, like, could I bring in people? Could I leverage you or Bib or someone else to like do all this? You know, that would be really cool.
Well, I mean, yeah, we could do that. You could say there's also other angles for that. So I mean, the classic thing is you could have um a provided proto-lang, and then everybody creates a branch, right?
Hmm.
Another thing would be is like two people collaborate, or more than two, because it can happen with many languages. Create a language, create something that's usable and have a decent base, and then Creolize. Um,
That is an embarrassing gap in my knowledge. I know absolutely nothing about creating beyond just even the most surface thing, creating pigeons and creoles. Again, I refer to I see the book behind you. Yeah, yeah. Refer to earlier conversation. I am a newbie.
I've got I think, do I have all of the volumes of this? I have 1, 2, and 3. I think that's all of it. And also this is companion to an online database. So
Who
like that's a
could you?
suggestion if you want to learn more about Creoles. The thing about Creoles is like most of the research is on um, Creoles with a European lexicalizer.
Sure.
So there is a question of, oh well, I mean, maybe also try to seek out questions of Creoles that have other like super straight languages, because like that is limiting, and it may be it may cause you to do some things that are unintended. But at the same time, there is quite a diversity of just like English based and Spanish based and Portuguese based
Mhm.
Creoles based on the different substrate languages they have. So you could take a look at all of that. Um,
If you'd send me the author name, that would be class. If I may, I know I realize you're interviewing me, but if I may ask you a question, you have 3 books behind you there. Do you have a particular interest in pigeons and creoles?
um, you know what? Not actually. I've never created a Creole language, and it's. I mean, everybody kind of is interested in them because it breaks the typical mold of the mold that we learn first of branching off into families, and it's combining two languages in a particular way. But I know the basics of how Creoles form, and I have those books. I've read a little bit of from those. They're very interesting. I would say that studying from Creoles is interesting for a similar reason that I like studying. I like taking inspiration from Chinese
Hmm.
in like lexicon building and grammaticalization, because the grammaticalizations can be very transparent.
Transparent.
You
Yeah.
you look at tok bisin and its prepositions long and belong. Well, I know exactly where they came from,
Precisely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The dual inclusive Yumi, I know where that came from. It's really interesting to see that and see that transparently laid out. Whereas in a non-Creole language, a lot of those things have gotten obscured by
Yeah.
time and historical changes, sometimes to the point where we don't actually know what the ultimate source was.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it is interesting. Um,
Cool. Cool.
yeah, yeah. I think that this is a good idea, actually. But like, you could have multiple people branch off of one protolang. You could have a creolization event happen. You could just have different conlangers start different families and populate a whole world. Uh,
I love that. Like, it's something I would love to do on my own, but then again, like, I realize the magnitude of the task. I'm like, oh boy. But because it just,
Yeah,
if we
yeah.
were to ever get to that stage, it just makes a world so incredibly lived in, you know. Again, just this deep history, this deep time, this interconnectedness between
Yeah.
all that is spoken on the language. It'd be such an amazing thing to do, but a feat.
And then you would get quicker to the part that I have always wanted to get to and never get to is like borrowing between languages.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I don't
Yeah.
think you're the only one. I think a lot of people I speak to who would be quite accomplished are like, you know, I've never actually borrowed between languages too much. Like it's a thing that step doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it's such a big part of natural languages,
Yeah.
but conlangers, like, since as either you focus on one project for a long time or you move from project to project that are not actually in the same world, and you end up with a bunch of isolates
Isolates, yeah.
that have no connection to any other language. And I mean, that's not how a real language will be. So it
or
would
or we
be,
or, yeah, or we real languages. That I think that's the key thing. You need to dedicate the time to how in a single world have all these
yeah,
languages, and you know you have to construct them all first. So like I can totally see why that's a thing that people
yeah.
don't oft get to. You know.
And also, like, uh we're branching off. We're talking about all kinds of like speculative things we could do, but like, another part of that is different conlangers have different styles. I am noticing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
David and Jesse, especially in their Langtime Studio languages, they're very particular about finding what the source of every grammaticalized morpheme is.
Mhm.
Although I know David doesn't like the
Oh,
word morpheme,
morphine,
I'm just.
morphine.
But I mean, they're really interested in that, and they always, like, when they're making a new affix or a new um, grammatical grammatical morph, they're always like thinking about what did it mean and what class of word it was before, and then bringing it in. What I've started doing that, some of that, but like I actually like said, like, you don't necessarily have to do that with every single one, because in Proto-Indo-European we have case suffixes that go all the way back to Proto-Indo-European, and we don't know anything about where they came from before that.
Yeah,
It's
that
kind of the yeah, it's kind of the thing that you talked about in Abheski, where like you're setting a starting point of somewhere like 1,000 years before
mhm.
what you're doing, and but but what came before is less of a thing.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that that is an important thing. Even when one is doing historical conlanging, uh, it is still important to remember that lots of things are just unanalyzable. They go all the way back.
Yeah,
I can't. How many times I've been to Wiktionary, just like with the PIE example you said there. You go back and you're like, oh, I wonder what the source of this is, and it turns out it's just always been that. I think it's
yeah,
important. It's important to have that in the language to make. I think to make it feel more lived in, but also it's kind of like a nice little get out of jail free card. That sometimes if you're just
yeah.
really struggling to come up with a thing, you can just be like, it was like that. Um, there was another thing you mentioned there. What was it? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, yes, yes. The styles of Conlang. I found a huge, huge, massive influence on my development and continued development is Bib Meridian. He was the one who got me into historical
Hmm.
Conlang. So without him, I would be even more of a noob than I already am. And it's
Yeah,
through him and then through watching David and Jesse stuff that I really have doubled down on that type of methodology. So I'm very into um, tracking things back as much as I can, also keeping an eye out on what I just said, that some stuff just does go back, and that's fine. You should have that. Because it's extremely useful, because sometimes you're like, oh, well, okay, this affix came from X place. And then way down the line, you figure out, well, wait a minute, because it came from this place, I could totally use that construction over here. And then it's just like,
Yeah.
that would never have occurred to you, you know? So I think it's a really useful thing to go too much down that route, you know? I think there's not really much negative in going down that route,
Yeah.
to a large degree. You know what I mean? Whereas I think the other can be, if you double that, if you go too much on, it just was like that in the proto-lang, you suddenly end up with something that is purportedly diachronic, but not at all. You know?
Right.
So anyway, so that was
Right.
again another waffling answer. Sorry, George, your turn.
No. That's very important, and it's highlighting the thing that's important. Well, anyway, we were talking about historical conlang and styles, and like my William Annis, who was co-host on this show for years,
Mhm.
he doesn't do historical stuff, and to him he sees the historical method as like the same as an artist who draws the bones before they draw the actual character,
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
things like that, as like a guide to help you learn, but it's not always necessary. I don't
Sure.
know. Like, I think in some cases you can probably do without it once you understand patterns, but I think it still will add something. Um, if you do things historically, because you come up with still like unexpected things and you have more consistency. But
Mhm.
you know, different conlangers have different things, and different conlangers have like different aesthetic processes. Like I like randomly generating roots.
Mhm.
David and Jesse are just like are coming up with them like by mouth.
Mhm.
Um uh you have like different preferences for phonologies and stuff. David hates central vowels. Agma Schwa, it seems like every single one of his languages has something like weird about it. Um, something that makes it a little difficult. Um, and I, you know, I'm looking forward someday to seeing more of your stuff, to see like what your aesthetic
Well,
style
thank
is.
you. Well, thank you. And I think it's
But
important to note that, like, no one is right or wrong here. That's the important thing.
yeah.
You know, it's not like if you're into the diachronic thing, anyone who doesn't do that is somehow like a bad conlang or scare quotes. Like, it's art at the end of the day, and whichever way you choose to approach said art is correct. You know.
Yeah. Um, coming back, let's actually in the last bit, the one thing I wanted to ask you about is, like, we've been talking a bit about like the sort of growing community of like YouTube conlangers and
Mhm.
such, and like how do you see like that, the growth in that, and like your particular place within it?
Well, so first of all, the growth is amazing, and I'm glad to see it. Again, I would have loved to have the likes of yourself or Bib or Jesse and David on YouTube back in 2015, 2016. That would have accelerated the process something serious. So it's really great that that exists for people now. And everyone should be watching everyone else here, because you just learn so much from them. Again, I think harkening back to what I said before, I think my role would be to sort of my gimmick here would be the fact that I am not as skilled as the aforementioned people, and therefore it would be like constructing a language live, air quotes, but from the perspective of someone who doesn't consider themselves um, that well versed in Conlang, and which I think is a useful thing to have to add to the collection of things that are going on. Because again, I can imagine the past version of me really gravitating towards that. It's like, oh, here's someone who's on a similar journey to what I'm on. Let me watch them and let me learn from them too. And then my hope would be that people would eventually, if they were to come to my stuff first, they'd eventually graduate and find, you know, Bib, you, Jesse, and David and go beyond that. So again, like I said, I'm very, very, very interested in the entry level. Like that really interests me.
Well, you won't be there forever though.
No,
Hopefully.
no, I won't. I won't. But I mean, it's akin to my teaching career. So again, I was a teacher for about a decade. I taught classical guitar and piano. I'm technically a musician by trade. And in those 10 years, I basically only ever taught beginners because it's quite difficult to become an accomplished classical musician. So many kids, I didn't teach any prodigies. Basically, they were
Yeah.
all for beginners, and I just it never got uninteresting, continuously inhabiting that beginner space because there's always ways to convey this information better and easier for people, and I really enjoyed it. So even one day when if I hypothetically go back to college and get myself a doctorate in linguistics or something, I think I would still want to inhabit this beginner space because it's an important space, I think.
Yeah, that is really a cool attitude to have. And uh, you know, different people also, different beginners will resonate with different messages and different grounding and different things that you use to tell them about things. So I think
Mhm.
a variety of that content can be helpful too. Um, uh, I really am enjoying seeing things grow, and like now looking out to uh, Conlang YouTubers, partly to try to grow the Conlangery channel to get it to get it up there, but also just to see newer Conlangers that I hadn't heard of before and seeing like what they do and how they are doing these things, how they are talking about these things. It's been a very different kind of experience than the previous stages of the Conlang community that I experienced with the forums
The forums, yeah.
and Conlang L. Uh, does anyone
So
go to Conlang L?
that is, I
Oh
don't
my
even know. I
gosh.
don't even know what that is, George. I'm sorry.
It's a mailing list.
Yeah, no,
That's so
I'm
that's
not
how
on it.
old
So.
that one is. The Conlang L mailing list, which I stopped using not so much because it was not interesting, just because using an email mailing list to talk to people is kind of frustrating.
Yup, I would agree with that.
But then on to social media groups on Facebook, on Reddit, on Twitter, which I don't think any conlangers are on Twitter anymore.
I don't think so. I don't think so either. I mean,
but
I'm nominally on Twitter, but I haven't visited that site in was it? It must be a year or two at this stage now.
yeah. And now we're on YouTube is like another stage of the community, and there's new people coming in with new ideas. It's really interesting.
It's really good, and like I said, I would have killed for this to be the sort of the meta back in 2016. It would have been amazing to have it. So I'm really glad it's here. So
Yeah,
shout
yeah,
out to
yeah.
you, George, for Tongues and Runes.
Well, I mean, I'm a late comer to it because like Biblaridian was on here, and he was like the guy for a while, and then Langtime Studio started, and Langtime Studio inspired me to bring Conlangery online on YouTube finally, because like, oh, there are people consuming video content about people are watching videos about conlanging, people are watching streams of people making a conlang. That was interesting to me, and well, I decided to jump into that and see what I could do with that. But yeah, well, thanks for that. But yeah, well, best of luck with the Abheski adventure. I'm going to be
Thank you very much.
watching that because I
Thank you.
I enjoy I enjoy the different perspective of, okay, here's a guy who is not into linguistics, who made a bunch of names.
Mhm.
Now a conlanger has to come and say, like, Hi, okay. How am I going to make this work and make it consistent?
And it's also quite fun being like, I'd be like, Bill, we're going to talk about nominal number. Here's a Wikipedia page and a few links to really dense art, like papers on it. Please read. Like, be a quick study here. We need to read through this. So it's fun. It's as fun forcing Bill to be exposed to that as well. But if I may go back again to tongues and runes again, I appreciate that you're meant to be talking to me, but I really enjoyed asking questions as well. Or I guess talking at people. But the tongues and runes, I just want to say thank you for making tongues and runes. It's great. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is going to be very much like Langtime Studio, which would have been fine and all. But the fact that you've come at this from such a unique angle with the D&D stuff, with the dice rolling, and like you said,
Yeah.
the way you generate roots and things is very different to the way David and Jesse do it. It's another really interesting perspective, and you're teaching me loads. You're pointing me to places that I'm really glad I know exist now. Like just today, I'd missed a bunch of episodes in December because December is crazy, and I just began catching up. And I was watching, I can't remember which episode it was, but you mentioned a website called Click, I believe it was.
Clicks. Oh, yes. Clicks. Okay. Yeah. Well, let me. So,
of course, go for it.
So let me just talk about Clicks for a second, because Clicks is an essential part of how I do Lexicon. And actually, you know what? Let me actually show the people. If you're on the video.
Hi, video people. Hello.
Yes. Have you had your face on video before?
I have, but not in years, and I forget how hideous I look.
No, you look great. You're a handsome man. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much. It's the big ginger beard that'll do it.
Okay. Let's I don't know whether I should share what I should share. Let's go. Yeah, Clicks. I should do a whole video on Clicks and DATSEM shifts and other things that I use. Clicks is very, very useful when you're lexicon building, because you have all these concepts. If you're doing something that's a rather basic concept, sometimes kind of even like Courtyard and Gazelle, and which are less basic, but like you go there, you can see the co-lexifications, and you can even click in here, and you can look at all the language families and see, okay, this seems to be, so dust and ash seem to be co-lexified across a lot of families. Doesn't seem like this is a one-off or a mistake. This is a really common situation that happens. So that means like one of your options when you're making the word for dust to have it also mean ash. And you can do that. You can cross-reference that with a couple other sites. You can go to Wiktionary. You can do a lot of things. But like Clicks is like my go-to when I'm lexicon building in order to get at where you're going. So like, I'm glad that I introduced some people to that, because it's handy.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea it existed, and my jaw hit the floor when I saw you open that. I was like, oh, that's brilliant. Give me more. Yeah. Come on, let's go. So
they also have info maps, so that like,
oh, they're beautiful as well.
Yeah.
Like very informative, but also extremely pretty to look at.
So they have, I don't actually know what the difference between an info map and a subgraph is, but they end up showing different information. But like, if we go into the info map for Earth, if this actually loads.
Oh. Oh no.
Okay. Then you see all of these, and you see it all in this nice this nice little web format, so that you can go and see, okay, Earth can be co-lexified with country, world, play, and then you can follow around to Earth, and then ground, and then area. So that's an axis where you could have all of those meanings in one word. It's really handy.
Yeah. 100%. So
yeah, Yeah, I'm gonna have to make a video
Do.
about the tools that I use for lexicon building then, because
Yeah.
I like database tools.
Mhm.
All of my dice tables are based on Grand Bank data now,
Yeah.
or um, my method for generating vowels that I have now is actually based on Foible, but like all the grammar stuff is all Grand Bank based. So yeah, it's interesting to see like what references everybody uses. The
Mhm.
World Lexicon of Grammaticalization is something I
Synchronization, yeah.
picked up from uh, David and Jesse, and
Really?
I do look at that from time to time. That's a useful thing to have if you're doing grammaticalization. Um, but yeah, I, all right, we're coming up on an hour. We got like sidetracked multiple different
I'm
ways, but
sorry. I'm sorry.
it's been it's been a great conversation. Do you have any like final thoughts you want to give people?
If anyone's watching this from my channel, will you just smash like and subscribe on the Conlangery podcast? That would make me feel very nice, and I'm sure it would make George feel very, very nice too. No, it
And
was.
subscribe to the Patreon too. That would be
Oh, the
nice too.
Patreon, very good, very good. It was great, and just behind the scenes sort of stuff for people listening. I was very nervous coming on because I don't think I've ever done an interview at all. And George, you were gentle for my maiden voyage here, so thank you so much because I really was a barrel of nerves coming on. And it
Yeah.
was great. I had lots of fun, so thank you very much.
Yeah. So that's great. Do you have any like advice for beginning conlangers?
I will give the advice my old composition teacher from college gave, and that was the trash can is your best friend. Which sometimes I forget and people don't want to acknowledge. Like, do not be afraid to destroy things and throw things out and rework things. That is part of the creative process, and it's an
Yeah.
incredibly important tool. So it's a one piece of advice that stuck with me throughout the years, and it translates well to Conlang. So that would be my show for that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great
Thank you very
conversation,
much.
and hopefully we can have collaborations and further discussions in the future.
Absolutely.
So, with that, I'm going to say happy conlaying.
Happy Conlang, everyone.
Special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. If you go over there right now, you can get early access to episodes. You can get access to scripts for my solo episodes, and you can go get access to exclusive polls for Tongues and Runes. Thank you to Mintaka, Connor Stewart Rowe, Kenan Kigunda, Viren Patrick, Kay, Alex Russell Hayes, Jesse, Sylvia Sotomayor, Alexis Hugelman, Paul Roser, Langworm, Cassandra Woodhouse, Miles Ronkovich, Jake Penny, Artifexian, Nicholas Norblad, Eloy Variana Mentuleum, Sigourney Hunter, Anthony Dosimo, Jack Keynes, Graka Grunk, Grammar Antifa, Wuming Shuai. Conlangery's theme music is by Null Device. Conlangery is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license.